I don't know if you guys have heard from anyone else, but I know Terry's going to be out tonight.
Oh, okay. I have not heard from anyone. So, and it looks like now I'm trying to run through and everyone keeps moving around as more people pop in. They're bouncing all over where they are. Trying to think if we have anyone.
I think we're all here otherwise.
Yeah, because I think, and we can let Brandon give an update if we have one when we get to the reports. But yeah, I think all 8 of our students are here. Josh is here. Greg is here. So the committee is fully here. And our presenters who are starting off are all here as well. So anytime you want to get started, Christian, take it away. You're still muted though.
A tale as old as time. Still muted. All right. I officially call this meeting to order at 5:30 on the dot. So, and you said all the students are here. Is that right, Joe? That's right.
Yep, everyone that I'm looking at on here. Nope, I'm not missing anyone. That I at least I'm aware of.
So everyone's here. Let me double check. Yeah, looks right to me. All right, with that, let's go on to agenda approval. Can I entertain a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, motion by Bjorn. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Brandon. Thank you, gentlemen.
And for those who are just, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Aubrey. If you're not a committee member, please do not vote on the votes that will pop up.
All right, motion approved. And next up, we have the approval of the minutes of last meeting. Can I entertain a motion to approve?
I forget what to say, but yes, I am doing.
You got it. You missed motions. All right.
Yes, I motion to approve the meetings. I just remember.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good.
I second that.
Seconded by Brandon. Motion approved. All right. So next up, we have the reports from, I don't have anything to report really. I just wanted to remind you guys that we do have more requests today than usual. So let's just try and get good questions in. Let's get in all that we can because we want to respect everyone's time as best to our ability. So with that, I give it over to Brandon. Any reports from you?
No reports from CWU at this time.
Perfect. And of course, as soon as I start to talk, my dog's going to talk. So it's because I'm interrupting his nap right now. He ate. So I'll quickly go over for the committee. You should have got, and again, you got a lot of documents from Aubrey. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at them. Really what you're going to see there and what I'm going to briefly go over is there's the schedule for this quarter of our S&A presentations. And then the kind of deliberation rubric or guide that you all were given. I'll explain what that is in a minute and how we use that. And then let Lacey jump in and kind of show you all of her data that she's got compiled for you all to take a look at. And so what you'll see on there is just kind of the tentative schedule right now. So the schedule that came out lists all of the base funding requests that we received by the deadline. And they're broken out and they're grouped together somewhat by programmatic type and things. And so you'll see the ones we have today are some of our first priority, as I'll talk about in a second, and things that have traditionally been kind of flat funded by the committee in the past. Next week will be ASCW, and then we kind of move into like things being together ECLC is kind of an entity into itself, but it's with student media that'll kind of carry over for 2 weeks, and then moving into a couple other areas. And so what you see on the agenda is what we're looking at for this quarter. And as you look at it, it pretty much has all of our meetings blocked off already. Now, this doesn't take into account if other business comes up, they'll get put on the agenda, but this way you know what requests are going to be coming up on what given week. And the very last week of the quarter is tentatively held right now for the beginning of the committee to come together to deliberate. Because as a reminder, we're going to have every group come forward. Again, they have 10 minutes to present. And then after they present, we immediately go into 10 minutes of questions from you all as the committee. And then we wait until we see all, and I think we have about 53 requests, if I remember correctly, that we're going to look at. And then we will come together as a committee to deliberate. So that last meeting of the quarter is where I say we're going to begin deliberation, because chances are as we get closer, we're going to need to identify another time, because chances of us being able to deliberate and get all this wrapped up in one meeting is unlikely. And so that last meeting will be the start of it, and then we'll wrap things up sometime in the week following that as we go throughout. But so you'll see what's on there. Now, the base funding request, that deliberation rubric that you all received, is really just kind of a guide for you all to use. If you have it, you can type it in there, either in the PDF or in the Word document, or if you print it off and take a look at it. Either way, this is really just a guide, because I'll tell you the things, this is going to be over the course of a 10-week period. And so wanting to make sure any notes you all have about requests you can take now so you remember it when we begin deliberations at the end of the quarter. The one thing I do want to remind you all and make you aware of is any notes and stuff that you take on these forms are things that we are going to ask that you have to submit to Aubrey, because we are an open public meeting. And so any of our notes on things we do have to keep for public record's sake. So definitely encourage you to take it. I would just say don't jot down random notes irrelevant to the meeting or irrelevant to the presentation, because they're all part of the public record. And so really, this is for you to get a chance and kind of on your own do whatever scaling you want. But it goes through some of the key things we have in our program or in our S&A policies and procedures. And so it asks questions such as, just for reference, have they been historically funded by S&A? Is the university contractually obligated? And I'll talk about what that really means within that in a second. What do you feel is the alignment with the purpose of S&A and the funds? Is this funding request and are they looking for an increase in funding? What's the program's scope of impact? And then kind of the overall cost impact ratio. Just in general sense for you, as long as you are being consistent across the board is the important part. And then when we get to the end is when we'll deliberate at week 10 and on about your recommendations with each one that we'll talk about. Now, the part I want to remind everyone before we jump into all these, and again, we're not deliberating for another several weeks, so I'll remind you all as we get closer, but part of our program funding priorities, and it's written into the stuff we went over back in training several months ago, really says in the section, and if you go into it, it's in the S&A policy, service activities fee, section 2A3. Not that anyone is going to memorize that, but it says that the committee has to give priority consideration to pre-existing contractual obligations, like our bond payments, debts that we've already incurred. We can't just decide, hey, we're not going to pay what we've already legally been obligated to, and that the committee has approved. So that's the other part when we talk about contractual obligations and debts, is it's ones that you all of the committee have already agreed, yes, we're going to pay this. And so when we're talking about base funding, that really is the bond payment that we're going to talk about tonight. It also, again, under funding priorities has the pre-existing, or the priority consideration does go to student union and recreation center operations, and the stability for programs affecting students, which is kind of that general one. So those really mean existing programs when we talk about that. So we'll get into that more when we get to deliberation, but just as a reminder, that's kind of what we talked about a little bit in the fall when we did the training and all the prep pieces. These documents are for your all's own guide. Use them as you will. But like I said, having been through this before, I will tell you things that come up and are discussed tonight, and you all will make some great points and questions you may not remember 10 weeks from now after hearing 53 of these requests come forward. So definitely take the notes that you need on that end, so that way you're able to participate in the discussion at the end. I will let you all as the committee know, to help Christian out and to help the presenters, I'll be kind of helping to keep track of the time on my end and in the chat, because it kind of pops up. You can see when we get to 2 minutes, I'll just put a 2-minute reminder and a 1-minute reminder, but I'll let Christian call the clock when we get down to the 10 minutes. I think we'll be good tonight. We have some that are kind of co-presenting multiple requests together, just because you're going to see tonight it naturally makes sense with some of that. So tonight may not be as long as some of our other meetings later in the quarter, but we'll see. But make sure to ask good questions. Every presenter, and as you'll see, they've seen they were sent a copy of this deliberation rubric. They know some of the stuff that we've asked them to cover over there. But if there's stuff that you all feel like you're missing, you're not getting answers to, definitely ask. That's the point of the Q&A section of all of that. Before I hand it to Lacey to go over her part, any questions about the schedule, about kind of our role in this, or about that kind of notes deliberation document? Yeah, Eunice?
Just quick question. When I received the email from Arbor, there's a lot of forms. So for example, base funding request deliberation rubric, do we have to fill out that?
You don't have to fill, no. So that you got the deliberation rubric is for you if you want to use it as your notes. You can also just have notes that you keep on the side. We're going to kind of use some of those questions as our deliberation points when we get to that at the end of the quarter. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, Aubrey is sending out the base funding packets that we received each week as they come out. So you see what's coming the week of. So you're not going to necessarily get inundated with all 53 of them to try and look through at once. You'll get them in buckets at a time to look over as they're coming up. But yeah, you can fill it out, Eunice. You don't have to fill it out. It's for your own guiding document. But any notes and stuff you do fill out, I would ask that you send over to Aubrey when we're all done with this at the end of the quarter. So, yep. Any other questions? Yeah, great. Greg and then Josh.
So can we kind of just look at one of these for example and what we're looking at? Because as I look at the budget, there's a link in the PDF to a budget, but I didn't have access to that when I followed that. So I was looking at the other things, but it wasn't, you know, and maybe where do we look? Where do we see? Where are they? Is this a new request or somebody that's been funded? What were they funded? So just that basic. Are they looking for more money?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
And some of that, Greg, is what Lacey's going to show us in a second. And okay. Aubrey, correct me if I'm wrong, because those links wouldn't let you be able to go in. So Aubrey attached those documents in the what she sent you. So it says there's a link, but there's actually the budget document in that PDF with the rest of the request. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yep. Josh, you had a question?
Yeah. Do you envision that when we deliberate in a few weeks after reviewing and hearing all the presentations that we'll come together with like a ranked order, or how do we start that conversation just so we know what that looks like? So we can prepare now to think through, are we ranking these? Are we prioritizing them in a certain way outside of, you know, the deliberation document that's been provided? What's that final few meetings look like when we make decisions on this?
Yeah. So the way that I would envision it, and it is kind of open for all of you, is that what's going to happen is really we're not doing a scoring piece on it for companies. So it's really based on when you get to the end of that document, those overall recommendations. And so really where we kind of go through that is initially we kind of just from the start as a committee talk about any that we do not, that the committee has feelings on that they do not want to fund the program, just to get those out of the way ahead of time. So we can look at those and really go from those 4 categories we have at the back of do not fund at some level if possible, because those are the last ones to discuss, and then the fully fund and the fund at potentially a lower amount than requested. The way that it will really likely go is once we narrow out the ones we don't want to fund altogether, is looking at that dollar figure that Lacey has and really kind of prioritizing. Some of them are going to be ones as we go into this that we have to fund in some way given some of our funding priorities, but we can discuss those, and those will kind of be the first on the docket. And then it's really up to the committee on if there are ones that we want to discuss lowering funding on or not. But it's really going to be based on those kind of those 4 categories that we're looking at to delve into.
Gotcha.
And where that dollar figure is. And so there'll be some brief recommendations as a system stance that Lacey will give, and I'll give some recommendation as we get down to how we go through the deliberation. But you all as a committee, really, it's open to you all to discuss the individual requests or to move forward a recommendation of how we want to proceed from a system standpoint. But that piece, and so I appreciate the question, is what I'd be thinking about. And my recommendation, and this is me, is I wouldn't necessarily answer that overall recommendation question until you've heard all of them. You may have an idea of like you're feeling it should go in one of those 4 categories, but for the sake of equity of this, I would wait until you've heard all of the requests before you decide yes, fully fund, or no, do not fund, or where you stand on that, because they are going to be varied and different. And this is a very complex process with just the scope of the types of programs and services that we see.
So Joey, there is a few comments in the chat, basically referencing maybe having a Teams folder that has the presentation materials and other things. And I think that's a great idea. So we can work on that and get that set up before next week.
Yep. And I say that knowing that I'm going to be asking Aubrey if she can help us set that up. So thank you in advance, Aubrey. Yeah, and those are the only questions I see is with Jess and Bjorn in there. Any other questions? Awesome. Go ahead, Lacey, if you want to take away and show them your visuals.
Yeah. So as I start to pull this up on the screen here, Joey did mention we had a total of 53 base funding requests this year. So a few new ones and a few ones that kind of were combined. And one of those is the rec center, so that you'll see that tonight's meeting here. So I'm going to try and make this a little larger. Oh, wow. It's going to zero out. So anyways, so this kind of is a beginning of trying to see the big picture here. And one of the things I want to highlight is, even though we're going to talk about the big picture of the 53 requests, I really want to make sure that we're focusing on week by week requests. There's a lot of data here. There's a lot of different departments. They do a lot of different things. And so this is probably, we'll pull this up each week, but then I have some, you know, we're basically going to kind of dig in deeper and into the ones that we're actually talking about. So overall, there are 53, and that total, that grand total for all 53 requests is actually $8.3 million. And I wanted to give a reference number here because there are some new requests, but at the end of the day, this year for fiscal 21, we are currently allocating out $7.3 million. So as of right now, the requests are $1 million over what we're currently allocating. And so to kind of, I'm going to go with the new funding. I guess I should have probably asked, is everybody able to see my screen? Okay, great, thank you. And so this shows over here just the new funding requests that we have had. And we don't have any on the docket tonight, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to see that we have almost about $373,000 worth of new requests, which is quite a bit of money right there. And going to the currently funded areas that have requested funding, this gives a list of every single one. And some you can see that there's actually $0 change. And so they are requesting the same amount that they have received in fiscal 21. And some, there's a small percentage, but a couple have actually reduced their allocation. But overall, the current funded areas are actually requesting 7.9, which is $644,000 more than where we're currently funding. And so to kind of focus in on what we are going to be looking at tonight as this loads, is this is actually only filtering out the ones that we'll be presenting. And so we have the CERC bond, and this isn't in the order of the agenda, so I have to apologize. But we have the CERC bond payment. And as you can see, this is giving a 6-year financial kind of reference for what we have allocated out in the past. So we have, and we'll talk more about this in the presentations, but as you can see, this number has not changed for the CERC bond payment. And you have the recreation center in there. You also have the CW administrative fee. You can, and I think it's really important to notice that the fiscal 17, which is going to be the far right column, is actually the last year of the previous funding cycle. And so really the reason why I put that year in there is to really show you that overall things have been, you know, kind of marching up. You know, we have a lot of inflation, cost of living increases and such. And so when we look at these each week, we will be looking at 6 years. So we will be looking at fiscal 17 all the way to fiscal 22. And just to remind people, we are currently in fiscal 21. I have to remind myself that pretty much every single day. But as we go down this list, we can actually see that everybody that is presenting tonight has been is currently funded with S&A funding. And the graph down below just really is a visual of the data that's represented up above. So I know that was a lot of data, but does anybody have any questions or want me to kind of highlight anything specific with just the information that you saw? Oh, Josh?
Are the numbers we're looking at the allocation or the expenditures?
This is only the allocation for right now. So to kind of add on to that, Josh, I think one of the questions Greg had was, well, what do we, you know, how do we look at what has been happening with this department in previous when we're looking at that? And that's really those annual reports. So every single base funded area is going to have an annual report. Now, there is going to be some pieces that don't apply to these new base funded areas. But for what I would suggest for everybody is to really look at that schedule that has been sent out about who is presenting when, and really make sure you are prepped and ready and have looked at their financials. That's all in there. And I think when we really look at this Teams folder, we'll make sure those are in there as well. They are on the website, but at least then in the Teams folder, they'll be a little bit easier to download and see.
And I'd throw in there, as Lacey said, not only are the annual reports for everyone on the website, Aubrey got them all uploaded over the break. And so the ones they submitted in December are on there. She's also sending those with each of these requests that come up. So that's in the packet you get. You'll see their base funding request, their base funding budget, and then their annual report for those that have annual reports and any supplemental. So you can see what they've actually been allocated and what their expenditures have been over the last 3 years, and then the actuals and projected for the remainder of this year.
I can't really see anybody on my screen when I'm sharing. So if you have a question, just question away.
For the fiscal year 2022 on this is what's being requested, right?
Correct.
Okay, and everything else is what they've been allocated.
Yep.
Gotcha, thanks.
Will we get a copy of this document? This is really nice to look at. I mean, it's easy on my eyes.
Yes, Greg, I can figure this out. This is in Power BI, so there's definitely some pieces, and I actually think I can share it in Teams. So I will, if not, I can always PDF it. It's not as friendly in my mind with the PDFs, but we can work on getting this out, especially before the meetings too. I really was trying to kind of test out what everybody wanted to see when it comes to data, but if it is better for everybody, we can try and get it out with the previous documents with Aubrey's email.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, I know that's a lot of information and everything else. If there is no other questions from the committee members, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. And I didn't know if Joey had anything else to add.
No, I mean, I think Lacey covered that part. She's going to have those each week that we'll see. And then we are going to have that Power BI, that whole database. And there's a lot more information behind that when we do deliberation. So she can have that accessible and we can ask questions that she can quickly run and pull the data for us as we get into that. But just as a reminder, I mean, you have the schedule ahead of you. You have the deliberation rubric. But really, there's a lot of data here. So try not to get too far ahead of yourself and just look on a weekly basis of what we have in front of us. And to be mindful with the questions, because again, It's a lot of time for the committee, but also for the presenters coming in. We want to make sure we make good use of their time and we're asking the questions we need to. So no, other than that, unless there's any questions for us, that's all that I got. Turn it over to you, Christian.
All right, so seeing no more questions, let's move on to any public comments. So any questions, comments, concerns about anything regarding this? Was that a hand, Eunice, or no?
I mean, it's not about the S&A, but I would like to share something that I received email today.
Okay, sounds good.
It's going to be about the DEC is going to host some offer up, some section about the recent events today in DC, which is Friday 2 to 4 p.m. and Monday to 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Probably you guys gonna receive the email soon. I just sent the email to all the international students today. Brandon probably knows more about it then. So like President Mikhail say, please take some time to take a step back from everything today and take a deep breath. Thank you. I just want to say it today. I don't know why, but yeah.
Thank you,
I yield
Eunice.
my time.
Any more questions, comments, or concerns? And thank you for typing that up as well, Eunice. Thank you. All right. Seeing no more comments, I believe we can go on to new business. So for the requests, the first one is the student union operations and that subsection, I guess. And who will be presenting that today?
I will be.
Shuri.
Shuri, that's right. All
Hi,
right.
everyone. Can you see my presentation?
No.
Okay. It's showing on my screen, so. Let's see here.
Do you want me to try and share it, Sheree?
Let's see. How's that? Can you guys see it now?
There we
Yep.
go.
It's on there now.
Okay. Get started here. Okay, my name is Sheree Wilson. I am the Director of Student Union and Activities. I hear that I am the first presenter for you today, so I appreciate you guys having me be first. We'll see how it goes. So I'll get started. So a little bit about us, Student Union and Activities. We strive to provide a community-centered gathering space with exceptional programs, services, and facilities that encourage formal and informal student learning and leadership growth. Our facility is the hub of student life at CWU, with many opportunities for our students to engage in activities and events. Today specifically, we'll be discussing 3 out of 6 of my budgets. We'll be discussing a few more in March. So the specific 3 that we're discussing today is Circ Engineering, which is really our maintenance area of the facility, Student Union, Custodial, and Student Union Operations. So all 3 of these budgets have historically been funded by S&A in the following ways. So Circ Engineering, and we do maintenance not just on the student union, so this is really on the whole building. That's why it says Circ instead of student union. Has been 100% fully funded by S&A. Student Union Custodial and Student Union Operations has been partially funded by S&A and then partially funded by the Sub-B. During our normal school year, and as we all know, this hasn't been normal, but during our normal school year, we employ about 45 student employees in these 3 budgets. Some of the positions that we have are building managers, which our building managers are the ones that lock and unlock the facility. They're the ones that are monitoring security and safety of the facility. And we actually, our building's unique because after 5 and on the weekends, it's 100% ran by our student building managers. We also have information center attendants, and they're the ones that are sitting at the information center. They give out general information to guests that come into the facility. They also do laptop checkout during the normal school year, and lost and found, any questions that people have, they're the first contact. Our custodial assistants, and we like to call them flu fighters, and they're really the ones that are helping our custodial staff, and they're wiping down all of our heavily touched surfaces. For example, doorknobs, they're wiping down handles, stair rails, that sort of thing. We also have our custodial support or event support services technicians, and they're going to be our students that are setting up lighting, sound, equipment, microphones. I'm sure you've seen some of them around. And then we also have our event setup crew, and they're setting up tables, chairs, staging for events that we have in the ballroom, in the theater, or in 137A and B, the pit, that sort of thing. We actually did something really unique, and I'm mentioning this right now because I think it becomes important later in my presentation. Is a couple of years ago, we started to cross-train all of our student positions, and we did this at the time for a few different reasons. One of the main reasons was when we have a big program, we can pull students. If we don't have enough students in our programming area, we can pull them out of our building managers or event support to help us with that event. Same goes with our building managers. If we don't have enough building managers, especially like during the holidays, we can pull from other areas, and they're cross-trained. And it gives them a little bit more experience of what the other students do in those areas, a little bit of a different perspective. So I think that's important to mention. This is really just a snapshot of 2019-2020, or yeah, 2019-2020. This is not a full year for us because, as you remember, the pandemic started in the spring. So this really doesn't give a clear snapshot of our normal numbers, but this does give you an idea of how we serve our students. So that year we had 1.58 million people come through the building. Yes, we have door counters. I'm not making that number up, I promise. We had over 15,000 events that we scheduled. Normally we have about 22,000, so that's a little bit down. Spring quarter is our busiest quarter, so those numbers aren't reflected in this. We had over 2,000 S&A events, meetings, workshops, that sort of thing, just in the student union alone. And then we had over 5,000 events in the academic space. We checked out about 1,500 laptops, and again, this is very low, but it usually runs about 4,000 through the information center. And then we also had 141 work orders, and the work orders, we actually have our own work order system in the facility, and our engineering staff are the ones that are doing anything from fixing a leaky sink to painting an office space. So there were 141 that year. So how have we adapted during COVID-19, and how have we responded? Well, we've stayed open. We're one of the only facilities on campus that have continued to stay open during the pandemic to provide services for our students. We have limited how many students or who is coming into the student union for safety purposes. So we're really only allowing students, staff, and faculty to come into the facility. We're not allowing off-campus individuals at this time. We've showed pride. So what I mean by that is because we've been so limited on what kind of events we can have, we've tried to show our students that we're here for them and we support them in different ways. And this was actually during Pride Week, and they had all these spaces reserved as they normally do in the circ, and we had to cancel all of them. And so we wanted to support our LGBTQ students. And we decided to light up the cirque, and we lit it up in rainbow colors, as you see here in this picture. We celebrated, and we celebrated because we weren't able to have a in-person commencement like we have in the past. And we really wanted to support our senior student employees that we've had, many of them for over 4 years. And this is an example of what we did. This was one of our students who had graduated last year, and we created this graphic with Publicity Center's help, of course, and told everybody a little bit about Alexis. And then we posted this on our social media pages to help celebrate, hey, we recognize that you graduated and we're proud of you. We gave thanks. This is actually really cool. One of our student event support services staff came up with this idea of lighting up Barge Hall to give thanks to our first responders. And so our student techs went and for over 2 weeks created this site on Barge Hall, and it was to help the university community and the community as a whole to give thanks to our first responders. We've created all kinds of different spaces. We created a virtual calendar so that we can share all the events that are being offered to students. But this picture here is an example of our event support services staff had created a backdrop and a space for virtual events that we can then live stream to our students for different concerts that we can present to them. So this was really cool. And then I think most importantly, we continued to serve our students, and as I mentioned, we continued to employ all of our students, which we felt was so important during this pandemic, that we continue to support them in every way possible. Out of the information center, we've been giving out masks to not only students, but staff and faculty. We've been giving out thermometers to students. We've been giving out information, just general information. We've created screens that go up on the wall in the cirque that show information about what's happening and the events that are happening. We've started playing music in the cirque because it's so quiet in there and it just feels not normal. And so we started to play CWU in a couple different places in the cirque to help students continue to connect with the university. So what we're asking for is really, it continues to remain flat for this quadrennial in all 3 budgets. Our budgets support student and staff wages and benefits. And we also have goods and services, and our goods and services pay for kind of the boring stuff. It's building insurance, utilities, contracted services, equipment repair and replacement, but so important. We're going on 15 years this year in our facility. And so we are starting to see things break down and items that need to be replaced. So that's what we're asking for. Does anyone have any questions?
Bjorn, you had a question?
Yeah. How are you, I mean, obviously it's been a hell of a year, and how are you anticipating that operations at the cirque will change permanently due to the pandemic, among all the changes that it's caused, and how might that affect funding, necessary funding, that is?
I don't see it changing the cirque permanently or the student union permanently. I really think that we will be back, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, but we're operating with the thought that we will be at 100% fall quarter. And so we're down a few positions, and we're gonna need to start looking at rehiring those positions and preparing for fall quarter and hit the ground running.
All right, let's go to Brandon and then Eunice.
Hey, Sheree.
Hey, Brandon.
So I saw that I think you're requesting less money than fiscal year 21, right? Is there like a decrease?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I apologize.
Okay.
Sheree, do you want to stop sharing
Yeah.
your screen?
But okay. I think in the meantime, I think there is a decrease. And I was just kind of like wondering kind of like why the decrease for fiscal year 22.
Well, the numbers as far as staffing goes is really was given, that information was given to us on what the cost of staffing is. And then as far as a decrease, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, and I'm sorry, oh, there we go. There we go.
I get that there's a positive one.
We do have current vacancies within our areas. We have 2 custodial positions, and we also have a media tech supervisor that we currently have vacant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that kind of like makes a positive fund balance, which could roll back. But I was thinking because it says for fiscal year 22 in your new funding request that you're requesting less. So I was just like, is there a decrease in like expenses next year or?
There, Lacey, can you help me with this? I don't have the budget in front of me. I apologize.
Yeah, no worries.
So with Sheree's areas, she just presented on quite a few. So she has the student union operations, sub-custodial, circ engineering, and I think I got them all. And so what Brandon is referencing, Sheree, is the student union operations. Now, what I want to bring up is when we look at the kind of package of those departments, the custodial budget's actually increasing, and the student union operations budget is decreasing. So when you're looking at the total, I think this doesn't always show that because we have a few other departments in there. But ultimately, Sheree, I don't know really
okay.
if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, so I apologize, I didn't have that information in front of me, but yeah, so we've actually had to emphasize a lot more on custodial because of the situation that we've been in. And so that's where you're seeing growth in custodial and then a decrease in operations. Does that answer your question, Brandon?
Yeah, thank you, Sheree.
Yeah. Lacey.
I think Eunice had a question after Brandon.
Yeah, my quick question is, did you guys fire any student employee during the COVID-19?
No, we did not fire any student employee. We kept all of our students on. What we did do is we moved some of our student employees, like I had mentioned in the presentation. So we had student programmers that were actually helping with the flu fighters. We had event support services staff that was helping with flu fighters. That was really the emphasis. Where we didn't have a lot of work for students, we ended up moving them to other areas where we had more work. We didn't hire any new students. So for example, we had quite a few students that graduated. So for fall, we didn't rehire those positions. We just kept with our core students that we continued to have. So we had no layoffs with student employees.
Thank you so much for doing it. I have one small question to Lacey or Jerry. It's about in the paperwork so you guys are applying. I see the data, it says student payroll, also students benefit. What is that student benefits part is?
So that's actually a really good question. So basically the benefits is pretty much what it takes to, so the benefit doesn't actually go to the students. So it's really the salary and wages and cost of employees. So it can be sick time, it can be anything that's tied to pretty much their paycheck.
Thank you.
And just so you all know, I don't know if you saw, Christian got kicked out. He's trying to get back in, but I will take over the meantime, calling on people for questions, and he'll join us momentarily. Lacey, I think you had a question next.
Yes. So, Sheree, I guess this is kind of a somewhat two-part question here. There is a slight increase to the requests that you have across the board. So my question to you is, if you didn't receive those increases that have been primarily based off of the cost of living increase adjustments for your staffing, if you don't receive that, what would be the impact? And the second part of that question is, if we were to potentially reduce the allocation by, let's just say 15%, what would that impact be to your programs?
Okay, so the little increase that you do see is about a 3% increase in goods and services that I put in there because our budgets pay for things like utilities that I don't have any say in. So lights, gas, all of our utility bills. It also pays for our insurance, our building insurance. And it pays for cost of repair and replacement. So those expenses continue to go up, and we don't have any control over those. So I did put a 3% increase in goods and service because of that. If we were to have a 15% cut, that would really be positions. And so we would have to look at student positions and possibly even staff positions that we would have to reduce. And then we lose service to students when we do things like that, because we really rely on, as you can see from my presentation, we really rely on our student staff to help support the facility and the events and programs and services within the facility. Did that answer your question, Lacey?
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And Christian is back. He made it back in. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Yeah. Did Eunice get to ask his question? I know he had a. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? All right. No more questions. So would this be the time to make a motion on this particular?
No motion at this point. So really, since there's no more questions for Sheree on any of those three requests, that's like the others, we'll deliberate on it at the end of the quarter. And so we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, I believe, is the Recreation Department. And then I think I see Matthew Boyer somewhere down here. There you are. All right. The floor is yours, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. My name is Matthew Boyer. I am the Director for Recreation, and I'm thankful to be here and have a reason to wear a tie, which is a long time coming. So it's glad to be here. I do have a quick question before I begin, and that is, I know your time is valuable, and so we've combined our 5 requests into one presentation. Is there a way to request up to 5 minutes more and over 10, or is it just a flat 10 minutes before I begin?
The committee can make a motion to extend your presentation to 15 minutes instead of 10 if someone wants to say so moved and second on it.
I can make a motion if it's necessary to 5 minutes extra. So I can make a motion. Mr. Matthew can have 5 minutes extra for the funding request.
I'll second it.
And if there's no discussion, we'll move to vote.
Sorry.
Oh, there it goes. Thanks, Aubrey. And while that's going, I appreciate you asking in advance. So that way we'll do that. So you'll have 15 minutes. I'll still give the 2 and the 1 minute heads up in the chat.
Excellent. All right. Share my screen here. Can everyone see my screen? You should see a slideshow coming up. Fantastic. So again, my name is Matthew Boyer, and I am here to talk to you about our 5 areas in recreation. And the reason we're doing all 5 is that they're very intertwined. And as a director, I feel our success is tied together. If one area fails, we fail as a team. So that's why and plus our data and our talking points are very common throughout all. So within recreation, come on, click through. There we go. Here's our mission, our vision, and diversity statement. It's on our website. We try to engage everyone, and I'll show you some data later that I believe shows that we're doing that. And we believe in diversity, and we're trying to really incorporate that into everything we do as a unit. So here's our org chart. It's in the paperwork you've received already. We have a total of 15 professional staff, of which 3 are currently vacant. That's 2 custodial staff. We're trying to hire 1 right now. 1 health programmer as well. So those 3 positions are vacant, and we're trying to hire 1 of those 3 at this point in time. Overview of our department. If you don't know about us, again, 15 pro staff. We have an S&A funded for over 10 years since the building was established. We also try to employ over 160 students every quarter. Every quarter. Sometimes it's 175, sometimes it's 150, but roughly over 160 every quarter. We are the number 2 employer on campus for students. So we take pride in that. We do try to get them employed and teaching them the needed skills they need to succeed after college. The needs competencies, there's 10 competencies that employers look for. We try to focus on those and make sure the students have those as they progress through the career with recreation. So, but yeah, and then we have 5 facilities we currently manage, one of them being new, the Recreation Sports Complex as listed there in November 2018. Some of our programs and services, I'll go into more detail later on, but intramural sports, sport clubs, and again, I won't read them to you because I know time is limited and I appreciate the extra 5 minutes. A lot of slides, so I want to get through this. But we try and engage everyone. And here's some of our data from the last annual report we completed. What you'll see here is the document on the left-hand side of the screen, and then I blew some of those areas up on the right-hand side so you can read them because I know it's sometimes hard on your screens. And I'm happy to give this presentation to Lacey to share with everyone so you can chew it up later. That's not a problem. But there's some talking points that our various areas do throughout the year. One area that's up for tonight is intramural sports, which is right here. Talking about some of the things they do. I'm happy to say intramural sports has kind of evolved due to COVID. We're doing a lot more virtual programming with virtual 5Ks. Esports is becoming much more popular with Discord. And other ways to just walking challenges and whatnot, we're to engage students virtually instead of in person. Sport clubs is also up, so let's hear the bottom section here. We have a lot of students involved in our programs. This quarter, we had over 200 students engaged in sport clubs, so it's about half what we're used to seeing, but they're still building community and being engaged. So we're excited to have the opportunity for them to still be active. OPR does receive some funding directly, so they're listed here as well. And the other areas that were here, group fitness, PT, climbing wall, challenge course, they are all impacted by the rec admin funding that comes from S&A. Some more numbers here. The terminology changes sometimes in these numbers, so if you're not familiar with how we're labeling things, if it says unique, that means I am a unique user. No matter how many times I come in, I am kind of one time. If it's participants, think of a roster. In intramural sports, if I play on 5 rosters, 5 teams throughout the year, I am 5 participants. If I check in for those 5 teams 35 times, I am 35 participations. So there's a lot of different numbers there. I think if it's an academic class, my class roster is 35. And during the course of a quarter, there's 10 meetings. So if everyone shows up, that's 350 participations. So the terms change a lot, and we know what it is in here in recreation, but if you don't understand it, these may seem confusing. Wait, why is this? But the big number here is the 8,042 different people, unique people come through the rec center last year. So we think we're engaging a lot of students that are here on campus, and the aforementioned virtual programs, we're starting to reach those students that may be on the various centers through group fitness programs that are virtual and streamed and saved online. to our OPR and climbing wall and challenge course talks through Instagram or Facebook Live, to even our Discord channels and esports. Do students want us to think we're necessary? Well, in 2018, Central Washington hired Brailsford and Dunleavy to look at expanding the CERC. And while that's not going to happen, I'm not talking about that now. This shows the response from students as the demand they have for our services. So this is focusing on just student rec demand. Responses are only from students during that year. And it shows what we have existing and also the demand that students want. So it shows we're deficient in the demand for space for students. Hence, students are requesting our services and our spaces for their recreation purposes. So what are we asking for? Well, nothing new. This slide, you can see our current request, and you see what we're asking for next year. It's the same thing. There's no increase, no decrease. We just kind of keep the same. Does that mean we're doing the same thing we did 4 years ago? Heck no, it's a lot different. What we've considered is that the rec fee did increase in 2019. It went up $15 per hour, which was needed because, a few lines down there, minimum wage has jumped 44.5% since the last quadrennial. So minimum wage back then was 9.47. It is now 13.69. And since 1/3 of our budget goes towards student salaries, that's been a huge increase for us. Not to mention, the second line there, we're operating a new facility. The rec sports complex came online. We are now operating the facility and staffing it. And that's helping out the PE department, ROTC programs, and also athletics who use that facility throughout the year. We also took into consideration that COVID impacts. Enrollment is quite volatile right now. It goes up and down. We don't know what we're doing. We have budgeted for this year. We did many exercises internally in our staff to project 10% cuts. So we're prepared to operate 10% reduction in budgets throughout this year. Fortunately, we're not quite that low in enrollment, so we're financially stable at this point in time, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's still an unknown. Plus, our operations, we had to shut down in the spring quarter. So with that shutting down, that closure, while we did save some money because we couldn't operate our facilities, we also lost close to, well, over $500,000. Yeah, $500,000 in revenue through memberships and sales and things we normally operate on. So those largely balanced out. Does that mean we stopped serving our students and paying them wages? No. We created programs for our students to earn money still. We didn't create. Human Resources has a customer service certificate through CLA. We created programs where students could opt into that and get paid to learn new skills and new opportunities. So we tracked it, and if it did it, we paid them. We also still had some programs operating and needed maintenance and assistance with keeping it clean. So some students still came in the facility and maintained the facility with cleaning and other ways to earn money. But it was nowhere near the normal cost for operating a facility. We've also delayed some capital improvements. Our machines, I talked to this group, I believe last year, 2 years ago, about the need to upgrade our equipment. We got 18 new machines last year. We plan to do more this year, but that was kind of shelved, and we're waiting to see how this plays out to make sure that we can still serve the students with technology that they need with new machines that won't break down every 2 weeks, but also not put us in a deficit. We also have new preventative maintenance. That rec sports complex, the track, and that turf must be maintained, and so we have to start planning ahead for those thresholds where restriping the track or replacing or filling in the infield with that material to make sure it's a safe playing space. So, and also, we also to consider our funding sources, which is the rec fee. All students pay $117 a quarter right now. The self-generated revenue, which I mentioned previously, has been reduced significantly this year. And then this S&A funding. So all three of those come in to create the rec budget. How is it used? Well, for the rec admin support, we use it towards our pro staff. There's our pro staff allocation or expenditure. The S&A allocation is about 43% of our pro staff. By putting S&A money here, that allows the rec fee to be used for student services. In Camp CWU, that S&A allocation is for student staff. It's meant to be sure that they get the training they need before they do their jobs. So the student staff allocation, a lot of that is their job during the summer. This money, S&A allocation, is to ensure they get the 2 weeks, 60 hours of training prior to camp they need before starting the job. So that's what that helps offset, is that training component of student staff. OPR, that money again goes for student staff. OPR students undergo many, many hours of training. They have to have the most certifications of any of our students to do their job. We are not charging them for these certifications. That's wilderness first aid, swiftwater rescue, avalanche training, and others. So we don't charge them. This cost is to make sure that they get those training they need to do their job safely and leading other students on the trips. And one thing they do get, I don't know if you see the cursor or not, we teach them how to put chains on tires, because we do a lot of winter trips, or we have in the past. So we teach our staff to make sure they understand safety protocols throughout. Sport clubs and intramurals, those two areas are fully funded and not just partially. So this is their entire budget for sport clubs. It is $196,350. It's the largest one of all 5 requests. And that's because sport clubs are kind of like, they act like a varsity team many times. And they travel and represent Central Washington across the region. And it takes a lot of money. As you'll see, the largest component here is travel at 37% of the budget. The downside, we can't travel from last spring through this year. So this fund will show a fairly large carryover to next year. I do have a plan for that, which I think that conversation is coming up later down the road. We hope to we want to stop clubs and orgs in recreation from going to S&A for future funding accounts and using this money that's carried over now to keep them in-house, so that the S&A money in the future is going towards non-rec programs and opportunities. I'll have more detail on that later on. But anyway, Sport Club's S&A account is a larger one. There typically is 350 or 400 students engaged, and they do practice 3 or 4 times a week for, I think the last slide, 2,000 hours annually per club. Intramural sports, another fully funded area. This one will be the most tricky for us to operate without any new funding sources. As you see, the student staff wages encompasses almost 3/4 of this budget. And since this came across when minimum wage was $9.37, it's much higher than that now. So we're trying to figure out ways to make this work without charging students. All these S&A accounts and requests were done in the past because this body, S&A, wanted to make sure that these services were available to students, the trainings, the programs, and whatnot. We're not going to make this a charged event for students. When I arrived, we were charging teams the entry fee. That was been eliminated, and now we're charging them $20 a team, and that's more of a commitment fee. It was $55, now it's down to $20, and it's there because the students we talked to didn't want it to be totally free, because then students don't show up. They sign up and don't show up, and everyone gets frustrated. $20 is kind of that, you're gonna show up, you're committed to it. That revenue isn't a huge amount, but we'll make that work. What's short here will be covered by the rec fee. So intramural isn't going away. We'll make it work for now because we know the university as a whole is in a tight situation financially. We're not going to go to S&A saying we need more money because we think we can handle it internally so that they can all succeed. We don't do it alone. We do have a lot of campus partners. These are people we've worked with over the last 4 years. We try to build collaborations. I know during the last year, during COVID, we especially have worked with campus activities on doing some of our trivia nights and different engagements through social avenues. Wellness Center also has come to the facility to do their yoga classes with us. They do Mindful Mondays. We provide some space and equipment so they can do it in our facility. So, and the Berg has helped us out with streaming those to the website. So we are constantly working with partners on campus. We know that we engage a lot of students, and we're trying to help our partners reach them as well. But how do we know we're doing what we say we're doing? Well, we're doing what students want. Here are some ways we get their feedback. Every winter quarter for the last 2 years, we'll do it again this winter quarter, is we ask our student staff, what do they want? We do the NGT, the nominal group technique. Basically, it's a small brainstorming session, then small group to a large group, and they tell us what they want to see. I'm going to switch to another slide here quickly. That kind of shows. Do you see NGT on your screen now? So last year's winter results is they create ideas. We ask a question, how can we make recreation better? Our students have to answer that question individually, then as a group, they share it, and then they choose and vote on the top 5 answers with ranked numbers. Comes back to these, and this is kind of what they wanted. So 53 people here said expand the weight room, and the total weighted value, weighted from 1 through 5 of their top 5 answers, comes out here. And so we use this every year to see what students are wanting to see. And there's just a few of them, but we keep these every year and we kind of evaluate to see what students want. We also have comment cards in the rec center. We do surveys for various programs such as OPR, and we assess our users through focus groups and online surveys as much as possible so we can kind of get information back from students to make sure we are meeting their goals throughout the program. We also worked with the provost office last year. We gave them some data. And this is just recreation swipes into the rec center to say, are they learning anything when they're here? And they came back and these are results from that. This is not Matt doing his research. This is the provost office taking our data, crunching it up, doing some tests on it and saying, yep, these are statistically significant results. So we know that 3 out of 9 quarters, we're back in their GPAs. We know 2 out of 8 quarters, we were a reason they came back to campus. We also know that we're reaching a lot of students because they said that when they analyzed the demographic groups, we're hitting roughly 75% of each groups. And at the bottom of this page, you see those groups that they're looking at, those demographics. So it's not just one small group of Central. We're seeing everyone coming to the rec center and using our services, which has been fantastic. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to leave the slideshow up because as we're answering questions here, there should be some slides coming up that talk about national impacts of recreation that maybe you didn't think about. Hopefully can be entertaining. What kind of questions do you have? I think Eunice had his hand up.
Yeah, I have some question. That you were saying that you guys not asking money from students attend, but also in your report says you guys have around 275 teams registered, which is you guys asking $200 for each team, right?
For intramural sports?
Yeah.
Correct.
And that 275 people means $5,500 total you guys having money from this support. And you guys also asking money for that. Also, my other question is, you guys supporting sport clubs, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And first of all, I just want to say that I am so happy to you guys about because I am the one of the active member of your events.
Excellent.
But for the sport clubs, you guys support them, but they still also charging the students money, and each sport clubs have a different fees.
Correct. So
what is this difference?
Yes. So sport clubs are self-governed. They're student orgs, they're student-run, student-led. We try to advise them and help them succeed. Each sport varies upon their needs financially. We help them travel from place to place. When you take a team of 25 people to go wherever, it's a large expense to travel from point A to point B. We try to help offset those costs. Now, the team dues you're referring to that they charge each other may be registration for the team. It could be for equestrian, it could be the hay shavings. They'll pitch in to pay for that. It could be the uniforms they pay for. It could be many things. Now, our budget does allocate money to the clubs based upon how they do every year with achieving their requirements. So if they turn paperwork in on time, if they attend all meetings, we have a system that tracks their attendance, and they can send us a budget request saying we need $5,000, and we will approve or deny percentages of that based upon how they performed the previous year. So they're getting a lot of funds from us. And once they have that number, they then go to their members, say, well, we're getting $5,000 from rec, but we need $4,000. So each member has to pay $200 to offset their club budget. So each club creates their own budget. They decide their own dues. That is not recreation determined. That is each club determines their own due levels. And that's why they vary. I believe men's lacrosse has the highest dues because they're one of the more expensive clubs to compete. But also rodeo and equestrian, because they are equine activities, they also have high fees because of the animals that are involved. Our equestrian team is moving into the KVEC arena for lodging of the animals and use of the barn. So their team dues pay into that contract to rent that facility. Also, our club budget does pay for Oh, there's the end. It does pay for club insurance for our members. So we pay roughly $45,000 every year for medical and general liability for our sport club athletes. And the first question regarding intramurals and charging some money, I believe you'll see in the Excel document that was submitted for the annual report, there's roughly a self-gen, I think $5,000 to $6,000. It's not a whole lot. And that's what we've been using to offset the increased wage for student staff over the last few years. Does that answer all your questions there?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Lacey.
And then I think Brandon had his hand up first.
I just want to add one piece to what Matt said about the dues. Sorry, Brandon. It's not a question, but there's also, this kind of correlates to circuit counting as well, which will be later, but the dues also help pay for gear that they purchase and they own.
Yeah, with that team uniforms, because it's a personal item, we don't use our money for that. We prefer that students pay for the uniform themselves. That way, when they leave, it goes with them and it's their personal item or memento for that uniform. And that is part of their dues. Who's next?
Okay, then Brandon, and I think I saw Bjorn as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brandon first.
Yeah, I'll ask this first question and then I'll come back with some others. But for Matt and or Lacey, when looking at the request for fiscal 22, is the revenue from like the rec fee a part of the other funds received when we look at that?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else or is that the entire other funds received?
The recreation fund or budget is comprised of S&A allocation, the rec fee, and then our self-generated revenue, which is faculty staff memberships, facility rentals, or point of sale for program services, personal training, and all of those. And that's the only three sources of funding we have.
Okay. And then I guess then clarifying, Lacey, what does the self-support funds mean then exactly?
So self-support is what we have termed, and Matt just gave really good examples, but for example, they can sell memberships to faculty and staff. They can sell Gatorades. They can sell all sorts of stuff. They can rent their facility, rent gear, some of those. So anytime they do any of those activities, we're collecting revenue. And so it can be a mixed bag and it can be as small as $2 versus quite a bit of a dollar. Does that answer your question, Brandon? Yeah,
and it just kind of like helps with like the other ones, specifically like Camp CWU and like OPR. S&A funds 11% of Camp CWU and like 30% of OPR. So I was just kind of wondering, and I know that goes to the wages, but like what do the other funds go to exactly?
The other funds for those departments?
Yeah. I think they're say they're like the self-support funds. And then other
generally OPR's budget is roughly $100,000. It's primarily funded through the rec fee money. And so there is some self-generated revenue in there from rental of equipment, though largely the budget encompasses gear rentals, buying the gear to rent, the trainings, the certifications, the vehicle maintenance, goods and services, and all of those things. And since the S&A allocation doesn't cover those pieces, that's why I didn't really go into that in detail. The S&A allocation for OPR is just used to cover those trainings for student staff. It's generally gone within the first month or 2 months of the quarter. And then we start relying on recreation funds to manage the department after that. The only two areas that are entirely S&A funded are intramurals and sport clubs. We try and keep that just S&A funds. Although sometimes if we have to move rec money into there, we will cover that so those areas do not fail.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
And then Bjorn, I think you're up next. And just a friendly reminder, we have about 3 more minutes for questions.
Are you projecting net expenditures to be higher or lower as we go past the weirdness of this academic year?
Expenditure is always fun because there are some things that will increase naturally. Utilities, benefits, payroll. We can't control those, but we can control other costs, the equipment we buy, the services we offer. And so we'll manage those best we can so that we will make our budgets balanced. We're trying to be creative. The one slide I showed about Brailsford and Dunleavy, how students want more. We're trying to do more with the space we have. I believe that once we get past COVID, I believe students are going to want to come back. They want to engage. They want to build community. They want to be a part of the college experience. And so we're going to be ready for that. Now, COVID has enabled us to engage in a lot of virtual avenues, which are rather new. The streaming of fitness classes is new this year. OPR and climbing have done virtual talks throughout the quarter, and they had roughly, I think, 600 different engagements through that platform alone. So now like, hey, this works, let's do this more often. So they're trying to expand and reinvent what they're doing. But to answer your question directly, will we have more expenses? We're going to manage a budget. We're going to make sure that the bottom line makes what it needs to be.
Yeah,
And
I get you. And it's very up in the air. I completely understand.
It is. And like I said, we've delayed some purchases, the equipment and machines in the facility. The nice thing about student fee money is it stays in our department. So while it's here now and while we're being conservative, as we progress through this, we're trying to find ways to make the experience better for students. The new machines, the new, just, wow, this is new. I haven't been here in a while. Things change. We're trying to make that excitement when they come back to campus. We have new technology. We have ThorGuard at the sports complex so that if there's lightning or rain, wherever, we know, we can say, hey, it's not safe, get off the field. We have new technology in all of our areas for contracts. It's digital now. Our waivers are digital now, so less paper waste. We're trying to be more sustainable. So all these are things we're doing now. So as we progress out of COVID and we reactivate and re-engage the students at a higher level, we can do it seamlessly because we have this smaller kind of environment now to test in and grow from. But no, we're going to make the budget balanced. The request today is we know what the numbers have been. We want to keep those the same. So it's not like a change. We had to move money around. We want to be consistent and we'll make everything else work.
Okay. I like this pitch.
And with that, I believe that's all the time we have for questions. Unless
I have one question. It'll be quick, I promise. Matt, I wanted to ask what the impact to your operation would be if we had to go through a 15% reduction. I know you've touched base on a few things, but and you've obviously practiced this year, but if you could give us a quick answer on that, that would be awesome.
Right. So last summer, our staff modeled cuts of 5, 10, 15%. We had those prepped and ready to go, so we knew what the impact was. We plan to go 10%. That was kind of directed from above, so that sounds good. Sadly, the impact tends to fall on students, the student wages. That being a third of our budget, those things tend to get reduced. Plus, with minimum wage increasing, that's becoming more and more of our budget. We want to make sure we're still engaging students. So to ensure we don't lose the opportunity to engage students, our funding sources, our staff wages tend to have to drop a little bit. We also are reducing 3 pro staff right now. In the future, just keep it at 2, hiring 1 more custodial, because we know cleaning and sanitation is important right now. We normally have 3 custodials. We're going to keep 2 ideally on staff. That's a morning and a night shift. So a pro staff custodial is here at all times to make sure the facility is safe. If you haven't been to the facility over the past year or past whatever since it's been open, 6 months, it's changed. It looks a lot different. And Greg and I have talked a lot today about where we're going forward right now because the governor has changed things again. And we want to make sure the students have a chance to be healthy. You saw our mission statement, it's Wildcats in Motion. Our vision statement, Wildcats in Motion, engaged. It's winter, it's nasty outside. How do we keep students moving and healthy? So the impact, it may be either reduced programs or reduced student salaries. But it's hard to say. We're kind of taking it day by day. We already know that capital improvements is delayed. So that's one part of that reduction is not doing new equipment. Hope I answered your question. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. Shoot me an email. I'm here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for coming.
You're muted, Christian.
I thought I pressed it just a second earlier. All right, up next, I believe, is CERC Accounting, and that is presented by Lacey.
Yes, so I will try to, since I slipped that last question in there, I will try to make this, my presentation, quick. And so I'm actually going to be presenting on 2 departments. Even though there are 2 requests, we really are, honestly, oh gosh, I just, for me, it's one. And so the 2 departments that that I'm requesting about are CERC Accounting and Student Funds Financial Manager. So as you guys know, I am the Student Funds Financial Manager and I oversee CERC Accounting. And I wanted to kind of give an overview of what Student Funds Financial Manager's budget is actually for. So really what the intent of this position is to provide timely and accurate fiscal information relative to the Student and Activities Fee Fund, as well as the Student Union and Recreation Center fee funds. So what that means is I can work on budget development and forecasting, reporting, and a ton of the different budget and policies, and obviously the appropriate use of funds, which, as you as the committee members know already, we talk a lot about. The other piece that's associated with this position is serving in this role as the financial advisor to the Service and Activities Fee Committee. And I also help advise other administrators and the Dean of Student Success in matters that regard either the programs or the fees themselves. So moving forward a little quickly, what am I requesting? The total that I'm requesting is $120,406, which is 7% increase from our current funding. And really there's kind of 2 pieces that I want to make sure I mention there. The expenses that are associated with this budget are 1 position, so the Student Funds Financial Manager, and the others are goods and services. And those goods and services are, when we're in person, we usually have room and equipment rentals in the CERC. And that goes down into our video recording and our headshots for the committee members, and also any food and beverages. As y'all know, we haven't had that this year. So I'm really presenting our base funding based off of when we do go back in person. And one thing that you'll see in the financial analysis of the request is, even though it's 7% up from our current funding cycle, it is almost the same dollar figure that it was back in fiscal 17. And the reason why is because the last 4 years, in this current year as well, we've really I have been spending into the fund balance that I've had in order to offset the increase in charges. And some of that is just normal cost of living increases and benefit increases, which is primarily healthcare. And obviously the goods and services very minimal, but there has been some slight increases in there as well. So moving on to the next program, which is the CERC Accounting Office. This office provides all the budget and accounting services to all student clubs and organizations, which is also including the sport clubs as well. We process all of the funding reimbursements for the various funding sources through S&A Supplemental and all of the ASCW sources that we have talked about in the past few meetings. We also help support fiscal related matters to the S&A and Student Union and Recreation Centers. So those are the last 2 or the previous 2 presentations that you just saw. And the expense breakdown, what am I requesting? So I'm requesting $160,603, and that's a 3% increase from the current fiscal year. And the primary expenses in this budget is professional staff costs, and also student staffing. So this is where we have our students working what we call our club window, so that if you guys have ever come into our office, we have a window that we basically operate as a mini bank for the students. And so our students are the forward-facing people that you interact with when you need to either withdraw money or deposit money, or any type of fiscal related transactions. The other very minor expenses that we have in our budget are goods and services, which can be as simple as office supplies, printer costs, and equipment, which is really just a computer. So it's nothing really too exciting. But the staffing is really primarily 3 full-time staff members, which is my fiscal analyst 3, which is Danielle, and fiscal specialist Carmen and fiscal specialist Tammy. And then we normally have 5 to 6 students, but I just wanted to say with everything that's happened over the last year, we actually only have 2 students. And none of our students have been necessarily let go, but due to graduation and also students not returning back to campus, we have just naturally kept it at 2. We started this fiscal year with 3 and 1 student did not return for winter quarter. So that's where we are, but our intent when we are back to fully operating in our normal capacity, we usually have anywhere to 5 to 6 just to make sure the between class schedules and everything that we have office coverage. So on that, I wanted to kind of talk about a few topics here that, that I have here. I'm going to stop sharing. Really, one of the things I wanted to mention is our impact to students. And so we do have an impact to all of our centers as well. So not only are the centers actually base funded, and so we help them support them in budget needs and fiscal related transactions, but we also have students that engage on the centers as well. So we have West Side clubs. That's primarily where the clubs are. We don't necessarily have clubs on our East Side centers yet, but we do actually help process and their fiscal needs, even though we are, across the mountain range, but we do work with them. This year alone, we haven't had a lot of activity on that side, but we anticipate that that would change once things get up to normal operating, post-COVID. And then I think one of the things that I really wanted to highlight about our department that is interesting is that we kind of had to have this blended department where we help service students directly. So if a student really wants to do an event on their own without any, kind of department support, we do help them. They that's where they deposit all their fundraising dollars. That's where they, come through and cut checks and operate through that. And then we also help the departments and those administrators that are also facilitating the student programs and activities. So it's really interesting from our perspective because we really get to see a lot of behind the scenes. It can be as simple as reimbursing, a receipt from Fred Meyers to helping initiate a contract with a speaker that comes through. So it really just depends on what ends up happening and what the students are really wanting. And we just kind of go with what they end up, dictating through their fiscal needs, I should say. So I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted to kind of open up just in case anybody had any specific questions about the Student Funds Financial Manager budget or the circuit counting budget. Yeah.
You had a question? Okay.
So, surprisingly, I'm not actually talking about COVID changes now. I'm talking about this year had the whole restructuring related to club council and what areas S&A gives money to. When Jeff was here, he mentioned his office had been taking on some other responsibilities. How has that affected student accounting? And what does that mean in terms of raw numbers of students served?
That's a really good question. One of the things that we don't, when we talk about data collection, is we don't necessarily have a unique number of people that come through our office because it's so random and we don't necessarily have a counter in that way. So it's hard for me to say, well, we've impacted this many students this year. But I will say this, with all the changes from ASCW, and I've been in this role for 4+ years, the work on our end doesn't actually change. Whether we're working with a department or an administrator or a student, it's really the same for us. And so we just try to really make the biggest change that we try to do is try to make everything so efficient, because the more efficient that we can be, the faster that the students could get reimbursed. And one of those pushes that we've talked about is how do we, help the departments help the students. So that's where really circuit counting comes in, is really facilitating the conversations with the administrators to be able to potentially maybe prepay for expenses as opposed to being as opposed to the students being reimbursed. Did that help at all or answer that question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Lacey, did you see Brandon's questions in the group chat?
Thank you, Brandon, for asking that question. So I was waiting for someone. So one of the questions that Brandon asked is, what would be the impact for a 15% reduction? And where we are, we don't really have any goods and services. And the goods and services that we do have are so minimal and honestly required. So the impact for us would be staffing. And that would be something that we would need to discuss. And it would look like it could look like a lot of different things. It could look like maybe a full-time position needs to be looked at as something maybe lesser than that, or our student employees as well.
And Bjorn, you had another question?
How are you guys functioning with only 2 student employees? Is it difficult, or is it kind of in line with reduced activity due to craziness?
Well, I will say it's actually working really well. We have some really great students. We are very lucky. And with their class schedules, they have actually been able to work a little bit more than they probably would be in a normal way. And so when it comes to why we have students 5 to 6, it's because we're normally open from 8 to 5 every day, or Monday through Friday. And we haven't had those hours necessarily. And a lot of it is we don't necessarily have the traffic like we used to. We do a lot. I've really enjoyed, we've had virtual meetings with students, which is a new thing based off COVID. So that part's awesome and hopefully will continue. But a lot of our work in the normal world is just foot traffic. And so with our 2 students, we've been doing just fine, and we haven't had a need to go out and fill those positions. But once we get open, we will most likely initiate that.
Any more questions for Lacey? Seeing none, I'd like to say thank you, Lacey, for that presentation.
Thank you.
All right, and then next up, looks like we have the CERC bond payments. Is that right? All right, and then I believe that would be from Dean Gregg.
You're muted, Greg.
Greg, you're muted.
Waiting for it to identify that I was off of mute. Thank you, Christian. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to S&A this evening. I might have the most straightforward, maybe easiest number to throw at you all, although it is a big number. I do realize that, but for those of you that understand the financing of public education buildings, especially those that are utilized by students for recreation purposes or community development and building purposes or housing purposes, like our residence halls, our student unions, and our rec centers. We fund those facilities in the state of Washington with bonds. And when we work with students and students decide that they would like to build a new building or do a major renovation to a building, we work with students to determine that project. And then we, in order to fund those projects, need a commitment from students going forward for a fixed amount of time. In this particular request, it's a 30-year window, basically a 30-year mortgage payment on the CERC. And we are, every year, we have a standing commitment. That's a legal commitment that we have with the bond company to make a bond payment of $850,000 for the CERC. And so that's what I put in front of you today as part of the CERC bond payment, is we are requesting $850,000 to continue to make that bond payment and be good on that commitment that students made 16 years ago. The bond runs through 2034. So we have a few more years to pay on it before the CERC is paid off. You know, it may seem like a lot of money, but right now in the lending market, you can get a 30-year home loan, a 15-year home loan, and more, you know, your percentage is about 2.5%, maybe 2.8%. I think last time I checked, it was about 2.8%. So if you don't own a house now and you have a mortgage payment, Someday you will. And this is the procedure that you need to follow in the process that you commit to when you sign that loan mortgage payment. And in this case, it's a public bond payment for the student union building. So in front of you, really, it's pretty straightforward. It's $850,000 a year. It's a fixed amount during that 30-year cycle. At the end of the 30 years, the building's technically paid off. And then we're in a situation where we will probably be back to this group saying, now we need to renovate the building. Now we need to do some other things with this building. Do we want to continue the bond payment, or do we want to reassess that at a different level? So this evening, I put in front of you the $850,000 a year bond payment for the CERC, and here to answer any questions that you may have about how we use that for its purpose or its life cycle.
I just have a question. I mean, it's not about I'm just curious about. It's maybe funny for you guys, but who you guys paying this money to? Who, like, who's receiving the $850,000? The government, or who? Like, who gave that money?
Can I defer to Pat?
All right. So we sold that year $64 million worth of bonds, and they're sold on the open market through a broker. And in fact, the university does not actually know who owns any one of the bonds. Originally, the majority of these bonds were bought by the Guggenheim Museum. Museums have things like trust funds where they need to be able to plan their return. So they loaned us, let's say they bought all of them, $64 million. We agreed that we would pay that back over time plus 3% interest, which is really cheap. We actually make the payments to the Bank of New York Mellon as the intermediary. It's all by wires. This is high finance stuff. It's kind of curious. I'm glad you asked. It's not the government. It does impact, there is a government aspect though. Since this is public debt, if for whatever reason that bond payment didn't get made, the state of Washington would come down on us extremely hard, because if a bond issued by Central Washington University failed, we didn't make the payments, that would be in the bond market an indication that everything in the state of Washington is at risk, and all of the interest rates charged would go up for every public entity in Washington. So Greg did a good job of explaining this. And it,
What we don't want to do is default on the bond payment.
Right.
Because any future development
would cost more, or for a generation, maybe we can't. It could take 30 years to wear off the central defaulted.
And we have a bond rating that's associated with the institution based upon how we manage those resources and how we make those payments. So you want to have the resources to make the payment, and you want to make the payment within the cycle that you're expected to make that payment. And so the collection of those fees with that fixed 30-year rate is an important cycle that we need to manage as effectively as we can.
And it's like a really big version of, say, a car loan. If you went and bought a car and you just stop making your payments, then, well, they can't repossess the CERC, but you would sure have a hard time getting another car loan.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just joking, Joseph, about that question.
No, it's fun.
And
though.
also, thank you for answering my question, because I was just curious, because that money can save me my whole life, I'm just curious about it. It's huge money, like.
Yunus is probably some Turkish banker, is my bet, but who knows?
Maybe my father. However, thank you for responding to the question. Because I don't think many students knows about this bond,
No.
Maybe it's gonna be a good idea to inform the students, because I knew that you guys paying that much money, but I don't know who's paying,
Yeah. We fund and finance our residence halls the same way.
The total bond payments of this type are $11 million a year. and many of the bonds are held by pension funds, right? So everything's interconnected, and if we defaulted, somebody on a pension wouldn't get their money, conceptually.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can move on. Or I could talk about this until next Wednesday.
So yeah, finance majors, though, I mean, this is a good, I mean, it's a good lesson in finance to kind of understand how this works. And know that, you know, about if you're gonna fund $1 million worth of construction, it's about an $80,000 a year bond payment, roughly.
Yeah.
You know, somewhere in that realm. So for every million, you're paying $80,000 on a 30-year kind of fixed bond note. I think there's a question.
Bjorn, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I'm looking at the document, and this all comes from S&A. None of it comes out of the CERC fee that students pay at all. It all comes from the S&A pool. Okay, because one thing I know that I fielded last year in Senate was people asking about why certain fees weren't canceled, and we had to explain to them bonds, and I just wasn't certain exactly how that all played out.
Yeah, there's a legal note and obligation to it, which is the big difference, you know.
You compel me.
Lacey, you had a question or a comment?
Yep, I just had a comment. With the rec center and the student union, they actually have bond payments as well. So the $850 goes to them to offset their bond payment, and the student union's bond payment on average is about 1.3 million a year, and the rec center is 1.1. So when we're talking about that obligation, I just wanted to point that out.
Brandon, did you have a question too, or no? Okay. Any more questions? All right. Seeing no questions, thank you for coming, Dean Gregg.
You're welcome.
Greg, you didn't answer. What would you do if it was reduced 15%?
We default on the bond and we'd be in trouble. And, you know, trust me, we've had a lot of serious bond conversations given enrollment as the end of the number of students paying into the fee pool to support these types of things with the amount of bond commitments we have as an institution. You know, it's not at a point where we're panicking, but it's concerning that we need to continue to make those payments and be on schedule with them, because we don't want to impact our bond rating moving forward. That has a lasting effect on the institution. And at some level, when we go through accreditation as a university, they're looking at our financial ability to maintain the institution as well. And so you may look at accreditation of the strength of our academic programs. They're also looking at the strength of our financial situation. So it contributes to that rating that we get from an accreditation from our academic body as well. So it's a big factor in the work that we do. Thanks to your stewardship.
Thank you again, Dean Gregg. And then finally, today we have, what is this? Administrative fees.
That'll be Pat.
Patrick, all right, you have the floor, sir.
Hey, if anyone has a problem hearing me, let me know. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself before I started talking. I got so excited talking about bond finance. I'm Pat Stanton, and I'm I guess I'm the finance director for the university. And I was on the S&A committee probably 15 out of the last 27 years. So maybe that's why I felt so comfortable to just start jumping in and talking that, but I realized the committee's changed, which is good. It's always good to see fresh faces and ideas. So I have a presentation here. Whoop. Can you see it? No. There, the 19th. Okay. Lacey, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So the administrative fee, financial discussion. This is a thing that the university and the committee have in the past worked out an agreement that certain, not all, but some administrative support costs are funded within the base funding budget. And the most important thing on this topic is that we keep in mind the parameters of the Killian outline and then the RCWs that define the S&A fee. And we have to, because of scrutiny from the auditors, we have to be able to demonstrate that we have reviewed this periodically. So this cycle actually works to that advantage. And we are requesting $454,745. So how did we come up with that? First, the administrative fee, or admin fee as they call it, I think it's been around for maybe 10 years now. And there were a lot of discussions about what is a fee for service to the S&A group that can be charged and what is not. So to be careful around this, so administrative overhead could be the salary for the president. That's a general administrative overhead, and according to the RCWs, we cannot ask S&A to pay part of his salary, right? It also wouldn't be politically very popular. Things that we can ask are things that we can tie an actual service. And so the list, and I realize you can't see this, I'm just gonna put this up here for a second to explain how the calculations work. They've negotiated in the past that, you know, the accounts payable and travel departments, there is a direct service to S&A. Every voucher that gets paid, we keep track of, was it an S&A voucher or not? And then what we do is come up with the total cost of running the department and figure out in the base year of 2020 fiscal costs that for travel and accounts payable, 3% of what went across the desk was S&A, and that would be $6,000 a year. So these are the services that we've worked out that we can demonstrate a direct service. Accounts payable and travel, HR, every time a student or a professional staff member in the S&A area is hired, they have to fill out a personnel action form, and there's a lot of cost to running HR. And those are things, both of these are things similar to what Lacey's office does, but further beyond. And I think the easiest way to understand where this concept is coming from is that if we didn't have personnel action forms for any of the S&A areas, we could probably have a slightly smaller HR department. Or another way of saying that is the HR department for the whole university, the teaching and keeping the buildings clean and heated for class, the HR department has to be just a little bigger to accommodate the S&A purposes. Now, you know, well, let me come back to that. So for accounts payable and travel, we went through and figured out for the year 2020, the last complete fiscal year, the university spent $183,000 primarily in staff. The S&A percent of transactions works out to 3.3 or $6,000. HR, we worked out how many student personnel action forms and all of the benefit and insurance related services, and it would be 10% or $247,000. IT, and I know that, you know, I'll send this to everyone. I'm going to summarize and not expect you to read all this. IT provides all of the computing infrastructure, and we spend almost $5.5 million a year on things like PeopleSoft and Oracle and software and training. S&A, based on the metric, is 2% of that, or 114,000. Payroll, separately from HR, they actually issue checks and they do all that processing. Only 2%, $12,000. Purchasing, so when you have a headline performance for homecoming, in a normal year, we used to have those. You know, they have to make a contract with whoever is going to be the performer, and that goes through our purchasing and contracts office. So the S&A percent of those would be 6%, or 47,000. And then student financial services, they collate and mail the accounts payable disbursements, which includes S&A club activity. So that's 26,000. So in total, that's how we came up with the 454,000. So now how do we make sure that this fits the rules of S&A? And maybe I might give you a little hint of what's happened in the past. Again, I'll send this out to you. We get out the RCWs and we find out what S&A fees, you know, this is the state constitution with all of its amendments, so this is law, are for the express purpose of funding student activities. And, you know, there's a few more in here that talk about the legislature. It was their intent that students will propose budgetary recommendations for consideration by the college or university administration and governing board, and that the students would have a strong voice in that. In the Killian outline, well, I'm probably going a little farther here. Let me stop and see if there are any questions at this point. I can figure out how to stop. Can't figure out how to stop. There we go. Does it stop?
No.
No.
We just see your desktop.
You have to click stop sharing.
No, but I don't see stop sharing. I mean, are there any questions as I'm trying to figure that out?
So Pat, there is one question from Greg Schlanger. So the amount that was requested in the system for fiscal 22 actually was 391. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on how that calculation is different than the one you're presenting on?
So you mean that when we originally filled out the form?
Yep.
Yeah. So we submitted the form based on the amount that we had been funded in the previous cycle, because we hadn't completed all these calculations. With everyone working remotely, finishing the fiscal year, having the state auditors show up and all the other chaos, getting lists of how many vouchers occurred in 2020 and having somebody sort through them, it just took longer. And I'm glad that we're going early in the year. But last year we were in March, or last time, right? So it's a little, it was a little more of a crunch. I might point out that last time it was 390,000, but we actually had requested 425, I think. I have it here somewhere. I wish I could stop sharing my screen. The problem is I have 3 monitors. Anyway, my point, let me, my point in mentioning that is I'm anticipating that there will be a question, because I've been paying attention and all of the other presenters have had this question. What would happen if there was a 15% reduction? So the last time around, I think we asked for 425 and we received 397. And that was accepted by, this money doesn't go to me. This is the whole university. That was accepted by the administration. But the budgetary strains on the university were different then than what we're facing now, with anticipated cuts to the state funding. So I don't know what would happen if the committee came back and said, well, we would fund this at 85 cents on the dollar. But I think we would look to the S&A bylaws, and I think we would possibly end up in the arbitration that's described in there, which could be an interesting thing to sit through. I mean, really, to see how that stuff works. I don't want to sit through it, but it could be fascinating. I don't know what would happen. I think we would still have, ultimately all those departments would end up with some sort of, if it was accepted by the administration, some sort of cut. And that, it really is painful to watch, but oftentimes that is, they scramble around in their budgets and they cut student positions because that's the only thing they have any wiggle room on. So let's see if you guys have any questions.
Bjorn, you had a question?
Yeah. First of all, Joey and or Lacey, are we allowed to ask for like additional data?
Yes.
Okay. Pat, I apologize. Could you provide us with like some kind of breakdown of which parts of the admin fee cost how much? Because I saw numbers and I saw what % of each number was S&A, but I didn't see how big number 1 was compared to number 2, and that kind of I blanked out.
I will send the PowerPoint and the Excel document where I kept all the data. And if you want to schedule a time, I can sit and go over it all with you. Anybody that wants.
Understood. Thank you. I just needed a little bit visualizer.
Sure.
Secondly, when you said arbitration, a chill went down my spine. We can tackle this later, but what's arbitration? Whenever we have time. I don't mean to take out of your question time.
Well, there's so, the S&A, pointing back to that RCW where it says that the students need to have a strong voice in making the decisions. The ultimate deciders on what happens with the S&A money is the Board of Trustees. And there have been times at Central and at other universities that a conflict or disagreement arose between the administration and the students. And so in the bylaws of the S&A, it talks about how to deal with that. And it's a formal process. And Greg, have you been through something like that before?
Not in Washington, but I have in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It is very similar. Because students have the right to kind of challenge on those issues since they're the stewards of those funds.
Yeah.
And so basically it puts it into a negotiation format with the Board of Trustees negotiating the conflict to resolution if possible.
And I would add in there, just for reference and to partially answer your other question, Bjorn, we have been, the last time the S&A went through arbitration was actually 8 years ago about the admin fee. We went through a whole thing, and Pat, I'm sure, remembers because we both have talked about this before. It was about the exact thing, and this went to the state, and we had the Attorney General's office have to come in. And it did come back saying that some of the things that we were looking at doing the admin fee the way that it was across the university wasn't allowable, which is where we came down to the calculation that you're seeing now of, these services that are directly applicable to S&A programs and departments is where it is. And so we did go through arbitration with that, which is a whole separate, and you can read it in our guidelines and policy, what it looks like, but a third party coming in there, providing the feedback and the outlook. And it was all over the newspaper and stuff back 8 years ago.
It was on
as well.
It was on the front page of the Seattle Times. I saw the article. I'd show it to you.
He does. Pat brings it up all the time, which is why I know he knows of it. And if you look back, and Pat will send us the update, if you look back at the base funding request from 4 years ago, it has a breakdown of the same units that Pat was kind of going through, but exactly how much went to each. And the numbers are going to be a little bit higher, obviously, as what we're looking at. But there is a whole calculation of what falls into each of those: accounts payable, human resources, IT. There's 2 different IT sections: payroll, purchasing, and student financial services.
Right. And prior to when you get to deliberation, I'm available to talk to any of you individually or in a group.
Greg, do you have a question?
There's the.
Yeah, so
there's the Seattle Times article.
Yeah. So my memory fails me anymore. But so did this at the S&A level begin 8 years ago? Then is that when it started, or it was in place before that? And I guess I was thinking when it did. Is this the same sort of fee that was applied on the academic side?
It is.
Place for a couple of years, and then that went away because I think you figured out a different way to charge the academic side that money. But it was, I mean, that was controversial, and it was fought from the academic side, and it went away, and maybe it just shows up somewhere else in a different way. But I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, how do we, can it go away on the student side if we follow any?
Okay, so there's a multi-part question there, I think. So the administrative fee collected by the university is $4 million in total. Most of it is charged to housing and dining in the bookstore and conference, anything business like continuing ed. There are fees charged to all the 148 or self-support things. And S&A is then, something like 10% of the whole admin fee. And it is the same one, Greg, that you remember all the consternation when it came in. And there hadn't been an administrative fee before that. The problem with having something that's structurally a $4 million part of the budget, if it could go away, well, then you need $4 million from somewhere else. I'm not a fan of the admin fee. I wasn't 8 years ago, I'm not now, but it is a reality of to provide the services. This is the method the university's chosen. But I can tell you that every other university in Washington State has one of these, and most of them are at a higher rate. So hopefully I answered your question.
And I would add with what Pat said to you, Greg. I mean, this was one that is, and for those who know the way the admin fee works to other areas, it's applied directly to those areas. And this was the agreement, instead of us applying the admin fee to each of those departments that S&A funds and taking it out of their base funding and their operational costs, is that S&A would pay it directly up front at the negotiated rate that it is, that it's only covering those units and those pieces that, again, the state came in and said this is what is allowable within there. So that way the areas like the rec center and like circ accounting and the wellness, or not wellness, and diversity equity center, those areas aren't having to pay it directly themselves out of their base funding. That's why we have it as a separate base funding unit.
Good point.
I believe we have room for one more question, and I see Bjorn's hand, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just so like the admin fee is collected and it goes to an S&A affiliated pool, which we then distribute without tapping into the S&A fee pool. I'm not sure if it even matters that I understand this.
I can jump in. What we actually do is we for the past 4 years it's been 379,000 and some change, and so from the S&A fees that we collect, we actually transfer that out to the CW administrative fee, and we actually do it at the beginning of the year, similar to how we base fund everyone. What Joey was kind of referencing is the admin fee for other areas outside of what we're specifically talking about is actually assessed each month at a percentage rate based off salary and benefits. So ultimately, if that was the case for S&A, it would be a lot higher than that dollar figure, and so this is the negotiated rate. Did that help answer that question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, excuse me. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Stanton, for that presentation.
Thank you for the time, and I appreciate talking to all of you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, we miss you on the committee, Patrick.
I'll stop by now and then. It was fun.
And with that said, I would like to thank everyone again for coming in with your presentations and all your insights. So thank you again for coming. And anything we need to go over before old business? Okay. Then my next question is there old business? No old business. All right. And then I guess other business, communications received. Have we received anything?
The only communications we received are all the things that you all have been getting, because again, the December 1st due date for the base funding and all the annual reports. I did say that Aubrey was able to get all those compiled online. I did not point out the fact that everyone did get their annual reports submitted on time for our existing base funding units. So everyone got them in. Those were all reviewed and looked over within all that. But those are the only communications that I have received since we met last.
Anything else? Okay, with that, I'll do a second call of public comments. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting. Eunice motions. Do I see a second? Seconded by Bjorn. And then do we have to vote for this or no?
I mean, yes, we do, but I think it's going to go pretty quickly.
All right.
Perfect.
All right, meeting adjourned at 7:36.
Thank you all. Have a fantastic evening and a great rest of your week. Take some time to yourselves.
Great to see
Yeah,
you
have a
all.
good night, guys.
Take care.
Hey,
Good
John.
to see you all back. Have a good day.